I played 9 Madam Web decks. 8 of them were terrible, and 1 of them was among the best decks, statistically, that I've ever played. This, obviously, is not a video about the 8 terrible Madam Web decks, although they will come up. It's a video about the one that was not terrible. This is the list that I was playing with her that actually saved my entire day. I lost about 100 SP combined with all those other decks, and then I gained all of it back and then some, going 20-5, gaining 41 cubes at the top end of Infinite with Madam Web boosted Clog style gameplay. And I don't want to get any out over my head here. Madam Web here is a bit more of a role player that is doing useful things for this deck than she is as a build-around. Every time I tried Madam Web as a build-around, which is basically like, is Human Torch in the deck? Are you trying to do a big Human Torch? What I ran into was it just wasn't consistent enough, it wasn't good enough. The numbers were fine, and there were multiple ways to try to capitalize on having big numbers, whether those be Taskmaster or Living Tribunal or any number of the things people are trying on 6. The issue is, you end up very vulnerable to tech cards, and you end up putting yourself in a lot of 50-50s with those tech cards that are just very, very problematic no matter what your sort of way of multiplying the big unit's power is. This card is very good at making big units, but it's not very good at making them every single game. It needs certain things to happen. And so what I've done in this list is taken a Clog shell that she kind of fits in anyway because redistributing your power is something you are very interested in doing. I have gotten a Dagger and a Vulture in here, and I'm using Dagger and Vulture to subsidize the points and then Cannonball to finish things off. This is a deck that is looking to play in a way that closes off lanes on turn 4 and turn 5. You have a bunch of power from Madam Web and other move cards alongside Dagger and Vulture, and then once you have a closed off lane, it's basically impossible to lose. The way you try to play this deck is by making sure you have some sort of guaranteed win and then cannonballing the other lane. It's the New Age Cannonball Profex. What Madam Web is doing in here is making it easier for you to reposition and adding a lot of power for not a lot of cost. This deck already kind of wanted to play Dagger. It was already kind of a thing that goes with what this deck is trying to do. The real addition here is Madam Web and then Vulture. And that actually is just straight up good. Like, you're very interested in a 3/9 that you don't really have to think about that much. Sometimes he gets bigger than that, sometimes he doesn't. You're very interested in being able to move a Dagger and then move a Dagger again. You get a lot of power out of doing stuff like that. Fundamentally, this is still a Clog deck, but she is playing a meaningfully good role here. I think a lot of people are going to watch this video having played Madam Web and been very, very disappointed. I certainly was disappointed with all of the things that happened to Madam Web whenever I played her. There was a lot of Red Guardians happening to her. There was a lot of me drawing cards in the wrong order happening to me. It didn't feel like fully investing in being a move deck was the right move, despite how genuinely strong she felt when she was there. The issue is her archetype is still a little bit unstable. So let's talk about her specifically and then see if she's still worth buying before we jump into the card-by-card breakdown. Madam Web received a couple of nerfs before she even came out. She released originally in the data mines as a 2/3, and Taskmaster was 5 cost. I personally think that if any of those nerfs had not happened, we would be in a situation where I'd be making a video calling this maybe the most busted card they've ever released. If this card released as a 2/3, this would be the kind of card that goes in every good cards deck because the value on it is insane. 2/1 seems about right to me. If this card released with a 5 cost Taskmaster, there would be so much more flexibility in the way these move bounce decks could arrange their turns. You'd be able to get a beast into a Dagger or Human Torch into a big, gigantic Taskmaster and have that actually make sense. With Taskmaster costing 6, it's not necessarily even that good to do that. You have to invest in stuff like, I don't know, maybe Ravonna Renslayer, maybe Magic. You have to go out of your way to try to make that stuff happen, and that is bad. A lot of the time when you go out of your way to make something happen, you invest too heavily in it, and it falls apart when you aren't drawing the right cards. A lot of decks in Marvel Snap have this problem. So with Madam Web, in terms of being worthwhile to buy, I think it's actually incredibly hard to evaluate, because right now I would say she is very close to the line, but probably not over it in terms of card you want to buy. I found that she was actually pretty good when you weren't relying on her or a move package to do everything, because you can't ask a move package to be consistent. It is in its nature to not be consistent. It's the scorpion and the frog. You would be asking a move package to be consistent is like asking the scorpion not to sting you. It doesn't do that. So what we've done with Madam Web is make it a little bit more small ball so that when you whiff, you still have other things that you get to do. And when you do the thing, you're still doing things that are very, very strong, but you're not overly invested in them. And I think that's my takeaway from this. But there is one more variable to talk about, and it's Aranya, which is coming out next week. And my big fear for Madam Web is that Madam Web hits like here, and then Aranya hits like here, and combined they hit like here, and everyone who skipped Madam Web is like, oh my god, why did I ever do this? What am I doing? Why didn't anyone tell me about that? And that makes this card just really hard to make a video about, because I don't know how good it's going to be in a week. Like, I don't know. What I can tell you is I had an 80% win rate with it in this one specific deck, and then like a very negative win rate with it in literally everything else I tried it in. On to the card-by-card breakdown. Ghost Spider is incredibly good in this deck, not just for repositioning cards that you might need to reposition, but also because you are still a deck that plays Dagger, you are still a deck that plays Vulture, and getting those cards to multiple moves is a great way to just get power for a fairly low investment. Ghost Spider is a card that can be bounced up by Beast. A lot of what you're going to do in this deck is sort of plan out your Beast turns, and making that happen is an important thing for you to think about during the course of the entire game, making sure you can get to a situation where you're beasting profitably, making sure you're not going to get clogged by your opponent's stuff, making sure you are able to best utilize the cards in your arsenal. I've honestly thought that maybe it's just better to save this card a lot more than it is to actually use it. Ghost Spider is very good, but it's also much better when it's unexpected. Now, there is something to be said for just like getting the value off it before a beast, but you have some confusion in your like turns 3, 4, and 5, where it's like, when are we actually doing this? What are we using it for? And if you get it onto a card like Vulture, onto a card like Dagger, it's usually just like 6 to 8 power, which is just a great rate for you to get, especially if it's repeatable. This guy is the worst of the move cards by a really significant margin, and I would consider taking him out if I wasn't more invested in move than a typical version of this deck. For comparison, look at a typical version of this deck. It's usually like an Ajax Hazmat type thing. It's harder for them to fit in Cannonball, and they're not getting their points out of the move. What we get out of this move package is mostly similar points output to like Hazmat Ajax, worse. I'm not going to sit here and say it's better. It's worse, but it's not that much worse. And in exchange, we also get to do that a lot cheaper. Doing it in groups of like a 2 and a 3, a 1 and a 2, all of that stuff is way, way more flexible than something like Hazmat Ajax is. Even though the number on Ajax is honestly probably a lot bigger, having Iron Fist and Grapple Arrow and Vulture and Dagger allows you to make up for that, as does having Cannonball, which is much harder to fit in if you're going to try to do the Ajax stuff. So what this deck gets is a flexible points package out of the move stuff, but it's not the kind of flexible points package that doesn't have synergy with the rest of the deck. Both Ghost Spider and Iron Fist can do things like move a Goblin after it's already gone across to your opponent, move an Acid Arrow after it's already gone across to your opponent. You have these kind of synergy plays that these cards can do, which means they're not just relegated to being bots for the movers. I realize Nico Minoru is like kind of generically strong, but honestly, I mostly used her for her move ability in this deck. Like, she really wasn't doing a lot else. Like, she was like a 1/4 with a move ability some of the time. I think very replaceable card, very reasonably willing to say this should be Aranya in a week. Just a totally fine to good card, but maybe the most replacement level card in this entire deck, which is saying a lot. Every time I play a Titania deck, I come away with the conclusion that Titania is busted. We're in a metagame right now that involves a lot of decks playing a lot of cards early in the game. If you are able to do Titania Acid Arrow, Titania Green Goblin, Titania White Widow, all that stuff's super broken. Like, you just instantly win a lane on, like, turn 4. If they have 2 things in a lane, they just absolutely die. It's very unfair, and it is one of the strongest plays in this deck. Titania is unbelievably powerful in this deck, because especially if you're, like, in the world where you're like, I've Titania'd you, I got you, the game is over. You also have, like, all these daggers and vultures flying around the frickin' board. So even if you're not going to cannonball the crap out of them, which you are a lot of the time, you have the ability to just be like, look, dude, here is 24 power dagger. I don't care that I didn't cannonball you. You're not beating this on numbers. Dagger's synergy with Clog has a sort of long-standing tradition here at this point. I think the 2 main people pushing this archetype forward have been Husky Puppies and Yo Woody. I think of this deck as sort of a spiritual successor to like a Yo Woody Clog bounce deck that he showed me about a week or 2 ago, and that was a sort of spiritual successor to the original Dagger Doc Clog deck. And the real like upgrade knowledge thing here is just, it's really nice when you have a 5-drop that wins the game, whether that be Ajax or Cannonball or whatever, to have the ability to like bounce a dagger on turn 5 into like dagger Ghost Spider turn 6 alongside that thing. Just a million points, just very, very hard for your opponents to deal with. An extremely, extremely powerful way of playing Marvel Snap. This card gets big. This card gets really, 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 really big. You have a lot of concerns when it comes to like Shang-Chi and Shadow King, because that is the kind of thing that is the only thing big enough to contest how big this card gets. In this deck, Madam Web is part of our small ball points package, and I do think it probably wouldn't be worth it without her. And I know that's weird, because I think you're going to watch these games and you're going to be like, she's not really doing all of that much, but she's just good enough that it's like, you talk about consistency in a deck like this. You have multiple uses for your dagger, not your dagger. You have multiple uses for your Ghost Spider, multiple uses for your Iron Fist. They can be used as part of your Clog plan. They can be used as part of a bunch of stuff, right? This one can just let you do whatever it is you want to do. You have unlimited freedom when you have a Madam Web on the board. You don't have to do the thing where it's like, oh, I'm going to move this and get more points. You can just sort of reposition in a way that your deck is actually happy to do. This is a deck that just kind of wants stuff to do, and Madam Web having the upside she does of being an extra way of making those cards move around the board, and also just like clearing stuff out. Like, let's say you're like, oh, you know, those points would be more useful over there. This is a deck that wins and loses on margins a lot. And so being able to sort of instinctively clean up positioning mistakes you make in the early game is actually a valuable thing in this deck. Now, obviously, the major thing she's doing is Dagger and Vulture, and you're very happy when you get that off. Like, Vulture being a 3/9 in a deck like this. Decks like this are often sort of bereft of points. They run into these issues where it's like, we don't have enough points, we don't have the points in the right locations, and even though we clogged them up, we can't win the game because of that. She solves that by both giving you the points and putting them in the right spot. Your Clog deck, you play White Widow. She's the patient zero of Clog decks being good. Like, the best Clog cards are the cheap ones, not because you play them early, but because you can play multiple of them on the same turn late. The best plays in this deck are like, check out those 2 empty spots in that lane. Guess they are now full, and I instantly win it. Whether that be Green Goblin White Widow, Green Goblin Titania, all of those plays are the really strong ones. And when you're able to just go, like, have a play like that on turn 5, it almost doesn't matter what the rest of your deck is doing as long as it has sufficient points in it, which is something the rest of the deck is taken care of. That's what this deck is doing here. This is a unbelievable card, not because you play it early. You can, obviously. You can beast it, right? Like, that's pretty busted, too. But it's because it pairs with the other cheap ones. You are almost never going to be in a situation where you can't play 2 Clog cards together on turn 5. All of your Clog cards are cheap enough that you should be able to do that. So the only way you're not going to be able to do that is if you play them earlier. And it's just like, that is unbelievably strong. They're all cheap. Hawkeye has 2 arrows that are really good and then 2 arrows that are very, very mid. The 2 arrows that are really good are obviously Acid Arrow and Grapple Arrow. Grapple Arrow is just like better Iron Fist, where you just like get the thing to move for free. It's just amazing. Basically 3-power Iron Fist. It's just awesome, really sick, really amazing. Acid Arrow is the best Clog card in the game, and the only reason it's allowed to exist is because it's gated behind Kate's RNG. We've talked at length about the power of multiple Clog cards in the same lane. The fact that Titania and White Widow get to do this with no downside is the thing that makes this so strong. Because you can pair this card, the Acid Arrow, with a White Widow, with a Titania, and you can say, look, if they fill it up, they fill it up. That sucks for me. If they don't fill it up, RIP to them, they've lost, right? And there's not a ton of downside for doing this. That's the crazy bit. You get to effectively free roll add up into a Professor X. That's what this deck is trying to do. You are trying to, for the least amount of effort and the most amount of free rolling, construct a Professor X Cannonball game plan. And you're pretty damn good at it. And you have points from Madam Web, Dagger, and Vulture. Green Goblin is the worst of the Clog cards because he's the most expensive of the Clog cards and because he is the most vulnerable to Annihilus of the Clog cards. He's one that's like, the other Clog cards, it's like, okay, you know, you are vulnerable to Annihilus, but you spent less on them, so you might be able to like mitigate that vulnerability by playing a bunch more cards. Green Goblin is like, you're very often just getting Annihilus out of this guy, and it sucks, right? But again, a lot of what this deck is built around is that turn 4, turn 5 double Clog, turn 4 Titania Green Goblin, turn 5 Green Goblin White Widow, all that crap. That's what you do. That's your bread and butter. And so you need to have a card like this in there, and he is the best one that we aren't already playing. Vulture's job is be big. I think if you could guarantee you'd get a 3-9 out of everything, you would just play the 3-9. But you can't guarantee it, and Vulture sometimes can be like a 315, a 321. It's really not that insane for that to happen. It's just a lot of the time you don't want to open up your vulnerability to tech cards so it doesn't happen as much. But like, yeah, you can very easily go like Madam Web into Vulture, move the Vulture, go Spider it back to the Madam Web, 21 power. Very easy thing for you to do. You do that, then like your turn 5 is double Clog, you move the Vulture again, they're dead. Like, they're just dead. They die. They can't beat that. And that is kind of what this deck is trying to do. It's not always going to be like goated Madam Web scaling everything forever, right? It's not always going to be like that. But it doesn't have to always be like that. It just has to be like some combination of goated Madam Web scaling everything forever, double Clog on their turn 5 or turn 4, Cannonball generally, and that'll be enough. I honestly just love 3-5 Beast. It's actually kind of nuts. Like, I think I can objectively look at this and be like, it made dedicated Beast decks worse, but like, holy crap, did 3-5 Beast make all these like splash bounce decks so much better? This thing having 5 power just rocks. Like, it's just super dope. It's just, you get everything you want out of the card and it has 5 power. We'd be playing this at 2-2. It wouldn't be better in this deck though, because it does most of the same shit that it would do at 2-2 at 3-5. And like that's kind of nuts to me. Like, this deck has so few legitimate conflicts. It's so much worse at 3-5 than it is in every Sage deck, right? Because like a Sage deck is going like Sage Beast when it was a 2-2. That was your turn 5. It was amazing. You don't need to do that because that's not what you're about in this deck. And the other thing that Beast does is provide a second way of keeping your big guys invulnerable from Shang-Chi. The first way, of course, is just chuck them in a lane that's clogged, right? Like, if you're going to move that dagger to the lane that's clogged up and just instantly win that lane, yeah, you don't need to worry about Shang-Chi on that dagger, right? Like, it's going to be there. That's how move works. But if you're not going to be able to do that, you are going to want to play this card, and you are going to want to protect your stuff when you can. The MVP is back, the heavy hitter, the big boss ball man is back to ruin lives. This card is phenomenal. There is absolutely no better card at being the boss monster in a Clog sub-theme deck than Cannonball. If you can pull off that double Clog on 4 or 5, the game ends because this guy has effectively infinite power. The other thing I wanted to point out here is this guy being 5 really matters. When we talk about stuff like Taskmaster getting nerfed to 6 and why that was important, the major reason is so you wouldn't be able to have one really big guy going alongside the stuff you beasted. That's what Taskmaster was preventing from happening, is like effectively being able to play like, you know, dagger or like Iron Fist dagger Taskmaster. That's what that nerf was preventing. It's like you beast up the Iron Fist and the dagger, Iron Fist dagger Taskmaster. It's like 24 power across multiple locations. It's very, very good, right? This costing 5 and having effectively infinite power if you don't have priority is basically your Taskmaster. Like, they got rid of Taskmaster. Now we can't do it with actual points, but we can do it with the text on Cannonball. We can do that beast into Iron Fist dagger Cannonball stuff in this deck. You can do that, and it's just like very, very hard to beat. So what the hell is Madam Web anyway? I would say she is the most confusing card I've ever had to review. It's day one. I have no idea whether you should buy her or not. Every other deck I played with her was the worst thing I've played this month. This deck was statistically, of decks that I've played for more than 10 games, the best deck I've played this month. I don't really know how to parse that information, so I'm just going to deliver it to you. Enjoy, see what happens, see if this kind of stuff gets figured out. She felt strong as hell in here to me, but it's too early for me to know exactly how far that's able to take her. And again, like, I'm not used to 80% win rates. I think a lot of people look at me and they're like, "Oh, Cam, you could get an 80% win rate with everything." No, dude. I lost so many games with every other Madam Web deck. I won a bunch of games back with this one. I was down, I lost about 100 SP, and this deck alone gave me back 130. That's what we're talking about here. It was a big deal. It was a lot of climbing. It saved my day. Does that make Madam Web worth it? I don't know. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Cam Best, and you've been phenomenal. Let's jump into the gameplay. You have a good one. He's a very good card. The new card worth 6,000 tokens? I don't think so. I don't remember what this person was playing. Thanks. Nico, blow up the bats. All right, you know what? Fair enough. What were you? It seems kind of over. Yup. I think I have to run the Nico out there now. Sandman? Yeah, I would not be surprised at a Sandman. So what are they playing here? Is it just like Red Hulk middle or some shit? Do they have like a Doom? What's the move? It's like an Ultron. Ultron, right? We beat because they send Titania over. Like, is there a world where it's not this? I guess the alternative would just be like... Okay. This deck actually seems fairly compelling. I'm not... Okay, this hand is so unplayable, though. I mean, he has a very large guy here if he wants a very large guy. He can move the Black Panther to the Spider-Man lane. Merge it with Spider-Man and have the biggest man anyone's ever seen. Go like Taskmaster here. I think I'm dying. Oh! I'm not dying. What have I tried so far? Everything. Actually, just everything. We have played so many things. You ever did deck review? Probably not, bro. Just a sad boy. Dog. Okay, they're snapping me. That can't be good. I'm gonna stay, though. I feel like my hand is actually pretty solid here. And I have a potential full Clog that I'm looking at. Yeah, I mean, that ain't good. In my defense, who the fuck is supposed to be expecting Electro out of a Hawkeye deck? This is Rolk. I feel like I want to snap this. I'm going to snap him back. I think I could lose 8 here, but I'm rolling these dice. That's crazy. That's actually insane. However, I have some bad news. I can't believe you got... What I did was I moved what's-his-face to the left, right? And I was like, it's actually impossible for me to lose a fucking Cannonball lane. That was my thought process. Like... Am I about to random fucking... I mean, that is just crazy if I actually pull this off, right? So what, is he Heimdalling me? What if he just isn't Heimdalling me? Then we'll 50-50 this Human Torch. Wait a minute. Doesn't this beat Heimdall left? Get out of here, Hercules! Get out of here, Hercules! Yeah, this actually does beat Heimdall left. What are you guys talking about? This does beat Heimdall left. They play Heimdall left. These go left. This lane becomes the mid lane. Human Torch goes here. We win. Is to just play cards in a way that is not taking forever consistently after I'm locking in my play. Because if you make a play that beats the play I locked in, after I make that play, it feels unpleasant. Man, I'm not gonna not play the 2-cost Wiccan. It's a pretty good card. I want to spread my shit out a little if I can. Why would that be what you do? Why would they want my cards? That just seems kind of crazy, doesn't it? Sure, fuck it, whatever. I'll YOLO this. Wasn't a YOLO at all. They were sniping? No, they were just dead. It's like, I don't think we can reasonably be like, yeah, that was a snipe when they were just fucking dead, dude. Just dead skis. Deadsies. The whole 9 yards. I'm scared. Annihilus would be such bad news. Goddamn. Goddamn. Ads, did we win? Yeah. We don't love just having the dagger out there, I'm not gonna lie. Weird. Oh shit! I'm stupid! I actually don't know how big that guy even is. I genuinely have no idea how large that man is. How big is he? 8, 16, 32? I beefed it. So, where does he Taskmaster? Actually, does it matter? We just run the 50-50 on the Cannonball anyway, correct? We just run the 50-50 on the Cannonball anyway. Let's run it. Oh. Okay, I thought it was a 50-50, but now it's not a 50-50. It was nowhere close to a 50-50. My B. I was like, okay, we got this. I was fine to just play a 50-50 on a Taskmaster. I was pretty much fine to just play a 50-50 on a Taskmaster.